My name is Alina Mercer. I'm 34, and I'm a senior loan officer at a regional bank, the kind of job where people smile at you while you save their homes. The night I nearly died, my own father didn't come to the hospital. He was too busy celebrating my stepbrother's fresh start with a new truck I helped finance and didn't even know about. All my life, Dad called me selfish. Said I kept score. Said I thought money made me better. But the truth was simpler. I was the quiet one who paid the bills, so nobody had to feel ashamed. Then the bank called him. Not to congratulate him, not to offer help. To warn him his accounts were in default, that the last payment had bounced, and that the person who'd been covering him for years had stopped. Before I tell you how my father went from calling me selfish to begging me to forgive him, please like and subscribe, because what happened next wasn't loud revenge. It was something worse. It was the truth, in writing, with receipts. I used to think the word family meant stability, like a roof that stayed over your head no matter what. But in my house, family meant a ledger, and I was always the one in the red. Dad raised me alone until I was 12. My mom left early, and people in town acted like he deserved a medal for doing the bare minimum. He wore that story like armor. He was the widowed hero, the hardworking father, the man who sacrificed everything. And I believed him. I believed him so much I became the kind of daughter he could lean on without ever admitting he needed help. By 16, I was working weekends at a grocery store. Dad said it was good character building. But when the electricity got shut off twice in one winter, it was my paycheck that brought it back. When I got into college on scholarships, Dad told everyone it was because he raised me right. The truth? I raised myself. And I paid for the privilege. When Dad married Denise, everything in the house changed, like the air had been replaced with something thinner. Denise had a son, Caleb, who was 17 then. He was tall, charming, and somehow always the victim of circumstances. A teacher didn't like him. A coach didn't see his potential. A boss took advantage. There was always a story, and Denise always made it sound like the world owed him. Dad loved that. It gave him a new role. Savior. Within a year, Caleb had the bigger bedroom. He had Dad's old watch. He had the kind of attention I'd spent my whole childhood earning with straight A's and silence. And I learned quickly what my place was now. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one who didn't need anything. When I graduated and landed my first real job at the bank, Dad didn't say he was proud. He said, "Good. Now you can finally help." The first time I did it, it felt like a one-time emergency. Dad had an old credit card debt he'd ignored, and a collection agency was threatening to garnish his wages. He called me in a panic, his voice shaking, and I remember standing in my tiny apartment, staring at the peeling paint, and thinking, he sounds scared. He's my dad. So I paid $3,750 in full and told myself it was done. It wasn't done. It became a pattern with a schedule. Then it became my life. Over the next 8 years, I paid $2,400 a month toward the mortgage on the house. Dad and Denise couldn't quite keep up with, totaling $230,400. I paid the property taxes twice when Dad forgot. I covered the car insurance when Denise insisted Caleb needed reliable transportation. I even signed as a co-borrower on a personal loan for home. Repairs $18,600 at 6.9% interest, because Dad said the roof was leaking and we can't let the house fall apart. The house didn't fall apart. I did. And every time I hesitated, Dad had the same line ready. "You're selfish, Alina." Selfish. Because I didn't want to finance my stepbrother's fresh start every 6 months. The day I realized how deep it went was the day Caleb got his truck. A shiny black pickup, new enough to smell like plastic and leather. Dad called me to come over, his tone strangely upbeat, like he was about to surprise me with something. When I arrived, they were all standing in the driveway. Denise was crying happy tears. Caleb was grinning like he'd just won a prize. Dad had his arm around Denise's shoulders, glowing with pride. "There she is," Dad said, like I was a guest at my own family's celebration. Caleb jingled keys in the air. "Check it out." I stared at the truck, my stomach tightening. How did you afford this?" Dad's smile thinned. Caleb deserves something nice. He's been through a lot. I looked at the dealership tag, the financing sticker still on the window. I knew those numbers. I knew those loans. I was a loan officer. I approved these kinds of deals every day. And then I saw the cosigner line in my mind before I ever saw it on paper. Because the only way Caleb would have gotten approved was with my name attached. That night, I logged into my credit monitoring app, and there it was like a slap. A new auto loan inquiry. A new account. $38,900 financed. Co-borrower. Alina Mercer. My hands went numb. My throat went tight, and I stared at my screen until the letters blurred. I drove to Dad's house shaking with adrenaline, the kind that makes you reckless. I walked in without knocking. Denise was in the kitchen. Dad was in the living room watching TV like nothing had happened. Caleb wasn't even there. He was out, showing off. I held up my phone. Explain this. Dad didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, like I was exhausting him. We used your credit. It's not a big deal. It's for family. For family? My voice cracked. You forged my signature. Denise's face hardened. Don't be dramatic. Caleb needed a vehicle. And I didn't need a choice? I said. Dad stood up slowly, towering over me the way he used to when I was a kid. You always make things about you. You're selfish, Alina. Always have been. Selfish. For not wanting to be used. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. But in my car, my hands on the steering wheel, I sat there and realized something that made my stomach drop even colder than the fraud. If they could do this, they could do anything. I started gathering paperwork after that. Quietly, carefully, like I was building a case, even if I didn't know yet who it was for. I pulled my credit reports. I downloaded loan documents. I requested statements. I saved text messages. Dad's messages were always the same. Need your help this month. Don't make this hard. Family doesn't abandon each other. Stop being selfish. Then came the night that finally broke whatever part of me still wanted to believe in him. It was raining hard. The kind of cold spring rain that turns the highway into a mirror. I had stayed late at work, closing out end-of-quarter reports. I remember being tired, thinking only about a shower in my bed. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up with a metallic taste in my mouth, and the sound of someone shouting my name, then darkness again. When I woke up in the hospital, my left arm was in a cast, and my ribs felt like they'd been set on fire. A nurse told me I'd been found unconscious in my car after it hydroplaned and hit the barrier. Do you have someone we can call? She asked. I gave her Dad's number. Because even then, I was still that girl. Hours passed. Then a whole day. No Dad. No Denise. No Caleb. Just a coworker named Marissa, who came because she saw my emergency contact was blank and guessed I didn't have anyone. She brought me a charger and a clean sweatshirt. She sat with me while I tried not to cry from the humiliation of being abandoned. On the second day, I checked my phone. One missed call from Dad. One voicemail. I pressed play, expecting panic, concern, anything. Instead, Dad's voice was irritated. Alina, I heard you had some kind of accident. Denise says you're okay. Listen, we need that mortgage payment by Friday. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. No question if I was alive. No offer to comb. Just money. I stared at the wall for a long time after that. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and loneliness. My chest hurt every time I breathed, but that pain was nothing compared to the quiet realization settling in my bones. I wasn't family. I was a funding source. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. On the third day, while Marissa went to grab coffee, I asked the nurse for my laptop. My right hand still worked. I logged into my bank accounts. I opened the scheduled payments. Mortgage transfer, $2,400 per month. Personal loan, $410 per month. Insurance, $198 per month. I stared at the list like it was a chain I'd been wearing so long. I forgot it was there. Then, without shaking, without crying, I canceled every single one. My finger hovered over the final confirmation button. For a moment, I heard Dad's voice in my head, calling me selfish, Ungrateful. Dramatic. Then I heard my own voicemail. We need that mortgage payment by Friday. I clicked confirm. And in that quiet hospital room, with my bruised body and my empty visitor chair, I finally accepted the truth. I was done. The first thing people don't tell you about stopping is how loud the quiet becomes. When I canceled those payments from my hospital bed, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed, like I'd walked out of a burning house barefoot, and only realized afterward how many years I'd been breathing smoke. I was discharged 5 days later with a stack of instructions, a prescription I couldn't pronounce, and bruises that turned every movement into a negotiation. Marissa drove me home because I still couldn't lift my left arm without seeing stars. She didn't ask why my father hadn't shown up. She just carried my bag and said, "You're safe now." Safe. That word should have comforted me. Instead, it made my eyes burn. At home, my apartment looked exactly the same, but I didn't. The silence was thick. No footsteps overhead. No familiar chaos. No one calling to ask for something. Just me. The hum of the refrigerator, and the dull ache of my ribs. For the first 2 days, my phone was quiet too. Then the consequences started rolling in like a delayed storm. It began with a text from Dad. Short and sharp. "Dad, the mortgage didn't go through. Fix it." I stared at the screen until my thumb went numb. I didn't respond. An hour later, another. "Dad, are you ignoring me? Call me." I set my phone face down on the table like it was something poisonous. Denise tried next, and her approach was different. Sweet at first, like she was buttering a knife. "Denise. Honey, we're worried. Your dad said you're home. We should all talk and clear the air. Families don't hold grudges." I almost laughed. Families don't hold grudges. But families do hold debt, apparently. Families do hold signatures they forged and call it love. I didn't answer her either. The next day, Caleb finally entered the conversation. His message was a single line that told me everything I needed to know. "Caleb, if you ruin this for me, I swear to God." "No, how are you?" "No, glad you didn't die." Just threats from a man who wore my credit like a jacket. That was when I did something I'd never done before. I blocked them all. Dad, Denise. Caleb. 3 taps. 3 locks on a door I'd never allowed myself to close. And then I cried. Not the dramatic sobbing kind you see in movies. Quiet tears that fell while I reheated soup and couldn't lift the pot properly. Tears that came when I opened the medicine bottle, and my fingers shook. Tears that came when I remembered I'd been lying in a hospital bed, believing my father would arrive at any moment. He never did. But as the days passed, I realized something else. Nobody died because I stopped paying. The world didn't end. The sky didn't crack open because I chose myself. It just got honest. A week after I got home, I received a letter in the mail. A formal notice, the kind with crisp language and no emotion. Notice of delinquency. It wasn't mine. It was addressed to my father, but the return address belonged to a debt consolidation firm. In the corner, there was a handwritten note in Denise's looping script. "Alina, we need to talk. This is serious." I didn't open the letter. I put it back in the envelope and slid it into a folder I'd labeled Receipts. Because that's what it was now. A file. Evidence. Not my responsibility. Then came the second wave. The guilt campaign. Dad started using other people. My aunt called first. Voice cautious. Like she was approaching a wild animal. "Sweetheart," she said, "your father says you're upset. He says you've cut them off financially. Is that true?" I swallowed carefully. My ribs still hurt when I took deep breaths. "It's true." There was a pause. "He says he doesn't know why you're doing this." I let that hang in the air for a beat, then said softly, "He knows." My aunt sighed. "Alina, he's your father." And there it was. The sentence that kept whole generations trapped. He's your father. Not he committed fraud. Not he abandoned you in the hospital. Not he has been draining you dry for nearly a decade. Just, he's your father. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just said, I need you to respect this boundary. She went quiet, then murmured, Okay. Like she didn't believe me, but she couldn't push harder without sounding cruel. After that, the calls shifted into the workplace. They couldn't reach me directly, so they tried to reach my reputation. One afternoon, my branch manager, Lyle, asked me to come into his office. He wasn't a bad man, just a cautious one. He folded his hands and said, We got a call. Someone claiming to be your father. He was upset. He said you're withholding money from him and it's causing hardship. My face went hot with humiliation. I kept my voice even. That's not appropriate. I'm sorry he involved you. Lyle hesitated. Is there anything we should be concerned about? Legally? That question snapped something into place. Because my father had always relied on shame to keep me quiet. He counted on me caring more about looking like a good daughter than being treated like a human being. And now he'd brought my job into it. I looked Lyle in the eye. Actually, yes, there are legal concerns, but not on my end. I left his office and sat at my desk, hands steady, mind moving faster than my body could. If Dad was desperate enough to call my workplace, then the pressure was mounting. And pressure made people sloppy. That night, I opened my laptop and began organizing. I built a timeline. Year 1. Mortgage support begins. $2,400. Month. Year 2. Property tax payment. $4,860. Year 3. Personal loan co-signed. $18,600. Year 4. Insurance payments begin. $198. Month. Year 6. Emergency credit card payoff. $3,750. Year 8. Auto loan fraud. $38,900. I created a spreadsheet and attached PDFs, bank transfers, mortgage statements, loan agreements, email confirmations. Every receipt was a brick in a wall I'd never had before. In the middle of that, as I was sorting old text messages, one popped up from Dad that made my stomach turn. Dad, 2 years ago. Don't tell anyone about this, people wouldn't understand. He knew. He'd always known. And he'd still called me selfish. I was staring at that message when my doorbell rang. It was late enough to make my pulse jump. I looked through the peephole and froze. Not Dad, not Denise. It was my grandfather. My mother's father, Franklin Hale. He stood there in a wool coat, silver hair neatly combed, holding a paper bag like he'd come straight from a bakery. He wasn't a man who did surprises. He was deliberate, measured, respected in town in a way that made people lower their voices when he entered a room. I opened the door and tried to speak, but my throat tightened. He looked at my cast, the bruises still visible near my collarbone, and his jaw flexed once. That was the only sign of anger he allowed himself. Alina, he said, voice calm as stone. Let me in. I stepped aside. He walked through my small living room like it mattered, like it was worthy of his presence. He placed the paper bag on my table and pulled out a container of soup, bread, and a small wrapped bundle. Eat, he said. I blinked. How did you? I heard, he interrupted, not unkindly. And I realized no one had told me. That sentence hit harder than anything else. No one had told him. Because if Grandpa knew, he would have come. And they knew that too. I sat slowly, careful of my ribs. Grandpa took the chair across from me, his gaze moving to my folder of documents. What's that? He asked. I hesitated. Then I pushed it toward him. Everything I've paid, I said. Everything they've done. He opened the folder and began reading. Minutes passed. The room felt like it was holding its breath. His face didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened, going cold in a way. I remembered from childhood when someone tried to lie to him. When he reached the auto loan paperwork, his hand stilled. This signature, he said, tapping the page. This isn't yours. No, I whispered. It's not. He looked up, and for the first time since he arrived, his voice carried something dangerous. They committed fraud, he said. Not a question. A verdict. I nodded. Grandpa set the papers down, folded his hands, and leaned back. Alina, he said quietly, Have you ever felt like a burden just because you had boundaries? If you have, type truth in the comments, because I want you to understand something I learned a long time ago. He paused, then continued. Softer. People who benefit from your silence will call you cruel the moment you speak. My eyes stung again. Grandpa reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. An attorney's card. Evelyn Park, he said. She handled my estate planning and half the property disputes in this county. She doesn't scare easily. I stared at the card. Grandpa, I don't want a war. He nodded once. You won't start one. He slid the card across the table toward me like he was sliding me a shield. You'll simply stop losing quietly. Then he picked up his phone, and right in front of me, he dialed a number. I watched his thumb press speaker. On the third ring, a woman answered. Evelyn Park. Grandpa's voice was calm, controlled. Evelyn, he said. I need you to look at a file. My granddaughter has been financially exploited, and there's evidence of fraud. I want to discuss options. I sat there, stunned, as he spoke like a man who'd already decided how this story would end. After he hung up, he looked at me and said, They're going to try to pull you into a private conversation. They'll want to cry and rewrite history. I swallowed. They already are. Grandpa's gaze was steady. Good. Let them talk. Let them leave more proof. He stood and buttoned his coat. And when the time is right, he added, we won't handle this in whispers. I frowned. What do you mean? He gave a thin, almost grim smile. Your father loves an audience, Grandpa said. So we'll give him one. He walked to the door, then turned back. Family gatherings, he said, as if thinking out loud. A birthday. An anniversary. Something public enough that they can't spin it after. My breath caught, because I knew exactly what was coming. Dad and Denise were planning a big family reunion for Dad's 55th birthday in 3 weeks. Denise had been bragging about it for months. A catered hall, speeches, photos, a room full of people ready to clap for Dad's hero story. Grandpa must have seen it in my face. That one, he said simply. Then he opened the door. One more thing, Grandpa added without turning around. You're not selfish, Alina. His voice softened just enough to crack me open. You were generous, he said. And they mistook that for permission. When the door shut behind him, I stared at the attorney's card on my table, the receipts folder beside it, and my phone still silent because I'd blocked them. For the first time since the accident, I felt something that wasn't pain. I felt prepared. The week leading up to my father's birthday reunion felt like standing on a shoreline while a storm gathered out at sea. From the outside, my life looked normal again. I was back at work, arm still stiff in its cast, ribs still tender under my blouse. I smiled at customers, approved loans, explained interest rates with the calm voice people trusted. But at night, I became someone else. Not angry, not vengeful, methodical. Grandpa and Evelyn Park moved like a quiet machine. Evelyn didn't waste words. She asked for files, I sent them. She asked for dates, I provided them. She asked for proof of my signature versus the forged one. I gave her old documents from my first mortgage application and my passport renewal forms. Everything I'd been too ashamed to call a crime, she called exactly what it was. Fraud. Identity theft. Financial abuse. One afternoon, Evelyn called me from her office. Alina, she said, I want you to understand something. You are not making trouble by naming what happened. The trouble already exists. You're just turning the lights on. I sat in my car outside my apartment with the engine off, listening. There's more, she continued. Your father has multiple debts you've been paying through indirect transfers. Once those payments stopped, his accounts tipped into default. The creditors are escalating. I swallowed. So they're drowning. Yes, she said. And drowning people grab at anything. Expect escalation. She was right, because 2 days later, a new number texted me. Unknown. Alina, it's your dad. I'm using Denise's phone. We need to talk like adults. I stared at it. My fingers hovered. I didn't reply. Another message came through, the tone sharper. Unknown. You're seriously going to humiliate me like this? After everything I've done for you? I felt the old reflex, the one that made me jump to fix things, to soothe him, to prove I wasn't selfish. Instead, I took a screenshot and added it to the folder. Then I blocked Denise's number too. That same night, Grandpa called. "Do not respond," he reminded me. "I'm not," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "Good," he said. "Let them spiral. Every message is a confession of entitlement." He paused, then added, "And Alina? Yeah? You don't have to attend this reunion." I looked down at my cast. "But you want me there." He didn't deny it. "I want you to be present for the truth, but you will not be the one delivering it." That mattered more than he knew. My whole life, I'd been the one expected to speak carefully, apologize, smooth things over. Even when I was wronged, I was told to be the bigger person. This time, I didn't have to be bigger. I just had to be still. By the morning of the reunion, my stomach was so tight I could barely sip coffee. I stood in front of my closet like I was choosing armor. Evelyn had advised neutral colors. Nothing flashy. Nothing that could be twisted into. She came to show off. So I wore a soft gray dress, knee-length, with a dark coat. My cast was still visible, and I didn't hide it. I'd spent too many years covering up damage so other people could stay comfortable. Grandpa picked me up exactly on time. He wore a navy suit and his old watch, the one he'd worn to every court hearing and city council meeting in his younger years. He drove without music, hands steady on the wheel. "Remember," he said as we pulled into the parking lot of the rented hall, "your job is to breathe." I stared out the window at the building. Balloons were tied to the entrance. There was a banner that read, "Happy 55th, Ronald," in glittery letters. Dad loved that kind of spectacle. "Okay," I whispered. Inside, the hall was warm and loud. The smell of catered food hit me first, then the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, chairs scraping. People turned when Grandpa walked in. He commanded attention without asking for it. Then their eyes landed on me. Whispers started immediately. I could almost hear the question floating through the room. "Is that Alina? The daughter? Why hasn't she been around?" Denise spotted us from across the room. Her smile froze for half a second, then snapped back into place, wide and fake. She hurried over like she was greeting a celebrity. "Franklin!" she chirped, too bright. "You came." Grandpa nodded politely, the kind of nod you give a stranger. "Denise." Her gaze flicked to me. "Alina." It wasn't warm. It was wary. Dad appeared behind her, holding a drink. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, his cheeks slightly hollow, but his eyes still had that same entitled sharpness. For a moment, he just stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to be angry or relieved. Then he laughed, loud enough for people nearby to turn. "Well, look who finally decided to show her face," he said. My heart tried to slam out of my chest. I kept my expression neutral, the way Evelyn taught me. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him. Dad stepped closer, voice dropping into that performative tone he used when he wanted others to side with him. "Everyone's been asking about you," he said. "They thought you were, you know, too busy." Denise slipped her arm through his like she was anchoring him. "We've been worried sick," she added, eyes shining with fake concern. A few people nearby nodded sympathetically. I realized then what they were doing. They were setting the stage. If I didn't play along, I'd be the villain. The cold daughter who cut off her poor father. Dad leaned in. "Let's not do this here," he murmured, but it was loud enough to be heard. "We can talk privately like adults. You've made your point." My point. Like stopping financial exploitation was a childish tantrum. I didn't answer him. I turned slightly and let Grandpa speak. Grandpa's voice was calm. "Alina is here to celebrate your birthday, Ronald." Dad's mouth twitched. He didn't like Grandpa taking control of the narrative. Denise jumped in. "Then she can start by apologizing," she said, sweet as poison. "We've been through so much stress. The bank has been calling. Ronald's health." Dad's eyes widened. "Denise," he hissed, but it was too late. People heard. "The bank has been calling." The phrase did exactly what Grandpa wanted. It made heads turn. It made curiosity flare. Dad recovered quickly, lifting his drink like he was toasting. Anyway, he said loudly, let's not ruin the party. Tonight is about family. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. We moved deeper into the hall. Grandpa guided me to a table near the front, close enough to see everything. I noticed Evelyn Park across the room, not in a suit but in a simple dark dress. She looked like just another guest, but her eyes were sharp and scanning. Caleb arrived late, of course, swaggering in like the room belonged to him. He wore a fitted jacket and a smirk. When he saw me, his face tightened. Then he forced a grin. Well, well, he said, strolling over. The prodigal banker returns. He glanced at my cast and snorted. What happened? Did you trip over your own attitude? Something in me wanted to snap back. Instead, I stayed still. Caleb leaned closer, voice low. You think you're going to embarrass us? You're the one who's going to look crazy. I looked him in the eye and said nothing. That silence made him uncomfortable. He straightened, eyes flicking around as if checking whether anyone had heard him. Then he walked away, muttering, whatever. As the night moved on, Dad worked the room like a politician. He laughed too loudly, clapped people on the back, told stories about how hard it was raising a daughter who always thought she knew better. And people laughed with him. That used to crush me. Tonight, it just confirmed the truth. He needed an audience to feel righteous. Then came the speeches. Denise tapped her glass with a spoon and announced, We have a few words for Ronald, because he's the heart of this family. Dad stood, pretending to be embarrassed, and moved to the front. The room quieted. He cleared his throat and smiled. You know, he began, I've always believed family sticks together, even when some people, his eyes cut briefly toward me, make selfish choices. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. He continued, voice thick with practiced emotion. But I'm a forgiving man. I believe in grace. And tonight, I want to say something big. He turned fully toward me, spotlighting me without consent. Alina, he said, loud enough for the whole hall. I forgive you. The room went dead silent. I felt heat crawl up my neck, my hands clenched under the table. Dad spread his arms like he was offering peace. I forgive you for cutting us off and causing all this chaos. You've always been stubborn, but you're my daughter. I'm willing to move on if you apologize right now. That was the preemptive strike Grandpa warned me about. He was trying to make me beg in public so he could keep his hero mask on. I took a slow breath, remembering Grandpa's words. Your job is to breathe. Then Grandpa stood up. The movement alone shifted the room. Conversations stopped. People straightened in their chairs. Franklin Hale didn't stand unless something mattered. He walked calmly to the front beside my father, his face unreadable. Dad's smile faltered. Franklin, he said nervously, this is between me and my daughter. Grandpa looked out at the room, then back at Dad. No, he said, voice carrying easily. It isn't. A hush fell so deep I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Grandpa placed one hand gently on my father's shoulder. Not comforting. Controlling. I have some things to say, he announced to the room. Dad's eyes darted, panicked now, because he could feel the ground shifting under his feet. Grandpa continued, Before I do, I want to ask everyone here a question. He looked around the hall slowly, letting the silence stretch. How many of you have ever felt like you had to earn your place in your own family? If you have, type truth in the comments, because what you're about to hear might sound unbelievable until you see the receipts. My father swallowed hard, and Evelyn Park, from her seat near the side, quietly stood and lifted a thick folder in her hands. The same folder I'd been building for years. The room leaned forward as one. Dad's voice cracked. What is this? Grandpa's gaze didn't soften. This, he said, is the truth you've been calling selfish. And I sat there, hands steady now, watching the moment my father realized the audience he loved was about to become the jury. For a second, nobody moved. My father stood at the front of the room with his drink halfway to his mouth, frozen in the posture of a man who thought he was about to receive applause. Denise's smile had collapsed into something tight and panicked. Caleb looked like he'd just swallowed a coin. Grandpa didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply reached out. Evelyn, he said. Evelyn Park walked forward in steady heels, holding the folder like it weighed nothing. She handed it to Grandpa with the calm precision of a surgeon passing a scalpel. Dad's eyes followed the folder like it was a weapon. Franklin, Dad started, trying to laugh, trying to steer the room back to comfort. Come on, this is a birthday party. Grandpa opened the folder and flipped to the first tab. Then it's a good time for honesty, he replied. He turned to face the crowd. And even though I was sitting in the second row, I felt like he was standing between me and everything that had ever tried to swallow me whole. My granddaughter, Alina, he began, has been called selfish for most of her life. Dad made a sound, half scoff, half warning. Grandpa ignored it. She was told she kept score. She was told she made money her personality. She was shamed every time she asked for basic respect. Grandpa paused and looked at my father. The truth is, she kept this family afloat. Denise stepped forward. That's not. Evelyn's head turned slightly, and she didn't even have to speak. Something in her expression told Denise to sit down or be formally, publicly dismantled. Denise stopped mid-step. Grandpa lifted a page. Exhibit A, he said, voice even. Monthly mortgage payments. $2,400 a month. He glanced down at the printed ledger Evelyn had prepared for my statements. For 8 years, Grandpa continued, from January 2017 through December 2024. That totals $230,400. A low murmur spread through the hall like wind through dry leaves. Someone near the back whispered, 230,000? Grandpa held up another page. Exhibit B. Property taxes. $4,860 paid in full in 2019 and again in 2021. He didn't look at the crowd for approval. He just kept reading. Exhibit C. A personal loan co-signed by Alina for home repairs. $18,600 at 6.9% interest. Monthly payments of $410 for 60 months. Dad's face was draining color by color, like a photo being erased. Denise tried to laugh. Franklin, you're making it sound like we forced her. She offered to help. She wanted to. Grandpa flipped a page without missing a beat. Exhibit D, he said. Text messages. He held up a printed screenshot large enough for the nearest tables to see. And I'll paraphrase, he added, because he didn't need theatrics, just accuracy. Ronald repeatedly calls Alina selfish when she hesitates to send money. He repeatedly tells her not to speak about these arrangements because people wouldn't understand. A woman at one of the tables frowned and said out loud, "Why would you say that if it was normal?" My father's voice rose, sharp with panic. That's not what I meant. Grandpa looked at him with a flat calm that made Dad's outburst sound childish. Then we move on, Grandpa said. He turned the page. Exhibit E auto loan, Grandpa continued. The air shifted. Even the people who had been skeptical leaned forward. Because cars and houses were understandable. But fraud made the room's skin crawl. Grandpa held up the loan documents. $38,900 financed, he said, with Alina listed as co-borrower. Caleb's head snapped up. Hold on. Grandpa raised one finger, not even looking at him. And here, Grandpa said, we have 2 signatures. He lifted a comparison sheet Evelyn had prepared. My authentic signature from earlier documents beside the one on the auto loan. This, Grandpa said, tapping the genuine signature, is Alina's. Then he tapped the forged one. And this is not. The room made that sound people make when they realize something ugly is real. A collective intake of breath. Caleb's face went red. She's lying, he said too loud, too fast. She agreed. She said she'd help me. Evelyn stepped forward for the first time. Caleb, she said calmly, if you keep speaking, I will advise my client to file the criminal report this Monday morning, instead of giving your family an opportunity to settle civilly. The word criminal hit the room like a dropped glass. Dad's knees looked weak. Denise grabbed his arm like she could physically keep him upright. Dad tried to recover with charm. Now wait. Let's not get dramatic. This is a misunderstanding. Alina's always been sensitive. I felt my stomach twist, but I stayed seated. I let Grandpa keep the floor. Grandpa turned back to the crowd. And I want to address something else, he said. Because some of you may be wondering, why now? He glanced toward me, just once, then continued. Because Alina was in a serious car accident. A hush snapped into place. She was in the hospital, Grandpa said. With broken bones and bruised ribs. She asked for her father. He did not come. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa lifted his phone and played the voicemail on speaker. He didn't announce it like a showman. He just pressed play. My father's voice echoed across the hall, irritated and cold. I heard it again. I heard you had some kind of accident. We need that mortgage payment by Friday. It felt like being punched and freed at the same time. A man near the front muttered, Jesus. Denise's voice cracked. He didn't mean it like that. He was stressed. Grandpa's head turned slowly. What exactly would be the right way, he asked, to speak to your injured child about money before asking if they're alive? Denise opened her mouth and closed it. Tears started spilling, but they weren't grief. They were tactics. Dad's voice went smaller. Alina, honey. I didn't know it was that bad. Denise said you were fine. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I watched him try to rewrite the story in real time. Grandpa didn't allow it. He turned to Evelyn. Read the totals. Evelyn opened the folder and spoke like she was reciting numbers in court. Because that's exactly what she was trained to do. In verified transfers and payments, she said. Alina Mercer provided financial support totaling $295,140 over 8 years. This includes mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, loan installments, and direct debt payoffs. There was a stunned silence. The kind that happens when people realize the scale of something they never suspected. Someone whispered, almost 300,000. Evelyn continued. Additionally, the auto loan in question carries an outstanding balance of $36,200 as of this week. My client did not sign this agreement and has evidence supporting that claim. Dad looked like he might be sick. And then Grandpa delivered the line I didn't know I needed. Alina didn't cut off her family, he said. She stopped being stolen from. That sentence snapped the room into a new reality. The murmurs turned into voices. A cousin I barely knew said, loud enough for others to hear, Ron, what the hell? An older neighbor shook his head. You let your kid pay your mortgage? A woman near Denise's table said, and you still called her selfish? Denise was crying openly now. You don't understand, she sobbed. We were struggling. Caleb needed help. Ronald was under pressure. Pressure. Like my whole adulthood hadn't been pressure. Caleb stepped forward, jaw clenched. This is ridiculous. She works at a bank. She makes good money. She didn't need it. We did. That entitlement made the room stiffen against him. Grandpa didn't flinch. She didn't need it? Grandpa repeated. He looked around, letting the question land. Do any of you believe, he asked, that someone should be punished for being stable? That success is a reason to exploit them? A few people shook their heads automatically, instinctively rejecting the ugliness. Grandpa turned back to my father. And now, he said, voice quiet, we come to the part you didn't plan for, Ronald. Dad swallowed, eyes glassy. Franklin, please, we can fix this privately. Grandpa nodded once, as if acknowledging the request, then denied it with a single sentence. You already tried privately, he said. You tried privately for 8 years. My father's lips trembled. Alina, please. I didn't know. I didn't realize how much it was. The audacity of that nearly broke my composure. He didn't know. He didn't realize. As if money left his accounts by accident. As if my name appeared on Caleb's loan documents by magic. Grandpa turned his head toward me then. Not to force me to speak. To offer me the choice. I stood slowly, careful of my ribs. The room watched me like I was a match near gasoline. I walked to the front, my cast visible, my hands steady. My father's eyes filled with hope because he still believed I'd save him from his own mess. He reached out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back, and for the first time in my life, I spoke without trying to make him comfortable. I was taught, I said quietly, that love means sacrifice. The room stayed still. So I sacrificed, I continued. I paid. I fixed. I covered. I rescued. Every time you said you needed me, I showed up. My father's face crumpled. Alina, I. I lifted my hand slightly. Not dramatic, just a boundary. And when I nearly died, I said, voice steady, you left a voicemail asking for money. Denise made a choking sound. I looked directly at Dad. That's when I understood, I said. I wasn't your daughter. I was your solution. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. And when I stopped paying, I added, you didn't ask if I was okay. You asked why I was humiliating you. Dad's shoulders sagged. I was scared. Me too, I said softly. I was scared my whole life. I turned to the crowd then, because I wanted them to understand this wasn't a dramatic family feud. This was a pattern people cheered for because it looked like loyalty from the outside. If you're watching this, I said, breaking the fourth wall, and you've ever been told you're selfish for having boundaries, type truth in the comments. Because the people who benefit from you will always call you cruel when you stop. I looked back at Dad. I'm not forgiving you tonight, I said. Not because I hate you, but because forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Evelyn stepped forward again, holding a single page. Ronald Mercer, she said calmly. This is a formal notice of intent to pursue civil remedies and to report identity theft regarding the auto loan if the account is not refinanced into the correct borrower's name and repaid within 14 days. Additionally, we will seek reimbursement for verified transfers. Dad stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. Denise gasped. You can't do that. Evelyn's tone didn't change. We can. And we will. Grandpa placed the folder back into Evelyn's hands. He turned to my father one last time. You wanted forgiveness, Grandpa said. But what you needed was accountability. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Release. Because the truth had finally been spoken in a room full of witnesses. And for once, I wasn't the one begging to be believed. The room didn't erupt into shouting the way movies would have you believe. It fractured. That was the best way I can describe what happened after Grandpa and Evelyn laid the receipts on the table. The air didn't explode. It split apart like dry wood under pressure. Conversations broke into small, stunned clusters. People stood, heads close together, whispering in harsh little bursts. My father stayed at the front like a man whose legs had forgotten how to work. Denise clung to him, tears still streaming, but now she looked less like a grieving wife and more like someone caught shoplifting. Caleb hovered behind them with his jaw clenched, scanning the crowd as if searching for anyone willing to defend him. He didn't find much. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years walked up to me carefully, like she was approaching someone injured. I didn't know, she said. Alina, I'm so sorry. I nodded once. I couldn't afford to absorb everyone's guilt. I'd carried enough. Grandpa touched my elbow. We're leaving, he said. I expected Dad to stop us. To demand a private talk. To beg. To rage. He did beg. But it wasn't the kind that sounded like love. Alina, he called out, voice thin and desperate. Don't do this, please. Think about what this will do to us. To us. Not to you. Not to our relationship. To us. As a unit that was only valuable when it protected his image. I turned slowly, looked him in the eyes, and said the only true thing left. I'm thinking about what it will do, I said. That's why I'm doing it. Then I walked out. The cold night air hit my face like a clean cloth. My chest loosened in a way I hadn't felt in years, like I could finally take a full breath without someone asking what it cost. In the car, Grandpa didn't speak for a few minutes. He drove with both hands on the wheel, steady as ever, while the hall's bright windows disappeared behind us. Finally he said, You did well. I stared out at the streetlights passing by. I didn't do anything. Grandpa's voice stayed calm. That was the point. For once, I wasn't fighting for space. I was simply occupying it. The fallout started the next morning. Evelyn called me at 9:03 a.m. Ronald contacted my office, she said. He wants to negotiate. Of course he did. Public shame had a way of turning pride into paperwork. He's willing to refinance the auto loan into Caleb's name, Evelyn continued, but he claims he can't afford reimbursement. I almost laughed. I wasn't being petty. It was just surreal to hear him suddenly concerned about affordability after 8 years of treating my bank account like a faucet. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him, Evelyn said, that my client's willingness to settle civilly is not limitless, and that the criminal report is still an option. There was a pause, then she added, he sounded afraid. Good. Fear was what finally made him honest. By the end of that week, the auto loan was transferred out of my name. The paperwork arrived in a neat packet, stamped and official, with Caleb listed as the sole borrower. The same day, I received an email from the creditor handling Dad's consolidation debt. They confirmed they were now pursuing him directly because the third-party payments had stopped. That wasn't revenge. That was gravity. And gravity doesn't care how charming you are. 2 weeks later, Evelyn secured a repayment agreement for a portion of what I'd paid. Not all of it. She was transparent from the start. Retrieving every dollar would require a drawn-out civil battle, and even then, people like my father often had nothing on paper until you looked closely. So, Evelyn looked closely. She discovered something Dad hadn't counted on. He had borrowed against the house equity twice, quietly, without telling me, and my payments had essentially been protecting his credit while he drained the asset. When Evelyn laid it out, Grandpa's face went colder than I'd ever seen it. He used her, Grandpa said, voice low. Not a question, a fact. Evelyn filed a claim that forced a restructuring of the debt. It wasn't dramatic to outsiders. It was meetings, documents, signatures, deadlines. But each page felt like a step out of a trap. Within 6 months, Dad couldn't keep up. The house that had been his trophy, and Denise's stage went into foreclosure proceedings. People in town found out quickly. They always do. The same neighbors who once praised Dad for doing it all alone started asking quiet questions. Did you hear Alina was paying the mortgage? Did you hear he forged her name? Did you hear she was in the hospital and he didn't come? Dad and Denise stopped getting invited to certain dinners. People became busy. Phones weren't answered. Denise's friends from her church group suddenly had plans. Caleb, unsurprisingly, bailed the moment the money dried up. He moved in with a friend across town, then another, then another. The truck payments he'd bragged about became the thing he complained about. I heard through someone else that he tried to trade it in, and found out he was upside down on the loan. That wasn't my problem anymore. Dad tried to contact me 3 different ways after the reunion. First, an email sent from a new address. Subject: please. Body: Alina, I'm sorry. Can we talk? No details. No responsibility. Just a desire to go back to the old dynamic where my silence made his life easier. I didn't respond. Then, a handwritten letter showed up in my mailbox. Dad's handwriting was unmistakable. The same blocky print he used on my childhood permission slips. He wrote about memories, about how he did his best, about how Denise made things complicated, about how he never meant to hurt me. And tucked between those lines, the real request: please don't take this further. Please don't ruin us. He still thought accountability was something I could choose to spare him, like an act of kindness. I didn't respond to that either. The third attempt was the boldest. He showed up outside my apartment building one evening, just as I was getting home from work. He looked older than I remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept. For a moment I almost felt that old pull. The instinct to fix. The instinct to be the daughter who soothed his panic. He stepped toward me. Alina. I stopped at a safe distance, keys in my hand. I didn't know, he said again. Like if he repeated it enough, it would become true. I tilted my head. You didn't know you used my money for 8 years? His mouth opened and closed. I didn't know it was that much, he tried. I held my keys tighter. That's what you say when you lose track of someone's humanity. His eyes watered. I'm your father. I nodded once. And I'm your daughter. That's why it should have mattered. He took another step, voice cracking. Can't you just forgive me? Please. I've lost everything. There it was. The line that made my spine straighten. Not. I'm sorry for what I did. Not. I see what I took from you. Not. I understand why you're hurt. Just. I've lost everything. As if the story was still about him. I took a slow breath. I'm going to say this once, I told him. Forgiveness is not a transaction. You don't earn it by suffering. He blinked, confused. And I'm not punishing you, I continued. I'm protecting myself. He whispered. So that's it? I nodded. That's it. Then I walked past him, unlocked my building door, and went inside without looking back. That was no contact. Not a screaming match. Not a dramatic announcement. A door closing. A life continuing. After that, my world got quieter in the best way. Marissa became my friend in a real sense, not a polite coworker who checked in. She taught me something I didn't know I needed: how to accept care without paying for it. Grandpa and I started having Sunday lunches, not elaborate gatherings, just soup and bread, sometimes a movie after. He never pressured me to talk about Dad. He didn't need to. He understood. And slowly, I rebuilt what my family had taught me to distrust: ease. I also did something I'd never done before. I opened a separate savings account labeled Alina. Not emergency, not family support, not house repair fund, just Alina. I set up automatic transfers, $600 every payday. The first month, it felt wrong, like I was stealing. That's what financial abuse does. It rewires your brain until your own needs feel like a crime. But by month 6, that account had $7,200 in it, and I felt something close to peace. A year later, I moved. Not because I was running, but because I wanted a space that wasn't haunted by the old expectations. I bought a small townhouse with big windows and a little backyard. Grandpa came to see it the first day and walked through each room like he was blessing it with his silence. This, he said, standing in the sunlight, is what stability looks like. As for Dad, the last I heard, he was renting a small apartment on the other side of town. Denise was still with him, but not happily. She'd lost the social standing she cared about. The whispers followed her everywhere, because people can forgive a lot, but they don't forgive someone who got exposed with receipts. Caleb drifted in and out of their lives, appearing only when he needed something. The truck was eventually repossessed, according to a neighbor who liked to gossip. Dad's credit was wrecked. The hero mask he wore for years had slipped off, and he didn't know what to do without it. But the most important part of this story isn't where they ended up. It's where I did. Because the night of that reunion, when Grandpa spoke and Evelyn held the folder, I didn't just get justice. I got myself back. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. People who only love you when you're useful don't love you. They love the version of you that makes their life easier. So, if you're watching this and you've been called selfish for finally saying no, remember, the moment you stop bleeding for someone is the moment they'll accuse you of withholding. Let them. Choose yourself anyway.